In the Arizona territory, some people are born already condemned. For Isabel Finch, her sentence was written on her face, a splash of crimson that bled from her temple down to her jaw. The good folks of Redemption Creek had a name for it. They called it the Devil's Canvas. She was a ghost in her own town, a whisper in the dust, the girl nobody saw, the burden everyone carried, but someone was watching. From the sun-scorched mesas, an outcast saw her, a man of two worlds who belonged to neither. An Apache warrior they called Talon. His spirit was as solitary as the lone eagle that haunted the canyons. He saw the whispers. He saw the stones the children threw. He saw the cruelty she swallowed down every single day. But he didn't see the mark. He saw a fire, a tiny flicker of defiance in a world that was trying its best to snuff her out. This isn't just a story about how to survive. It's the story of how two forgotten souls, a banished warrior and the girl no one wanted, took on the world and built a legacy from nothing but dust and grit. It's the story of how they proved that a life worth living isn't something you're given. It's something you seize. The sun was a hammer over Redemption Creek. It pounded the main street into a fine, choking powder. For Isabel Finch, the heat was just one more layer of misery, one more blanket trying to smother her. She walked with her eyes locked on the warped boards of the sidewalk. Her faded calico dress was a second skin, clinging to her thin frame. She wasn't hiding from the sun. She was hiding from the eyes. They were always there, flickering from the shadows of the general store, peeking from behind the saloon's swinging doors. Judging from behind the clean lace curtains of the respectable houses, they didn't see a girl. They saw the mark, the devil's canvas. Reverend Blackwood himself had given it that name. His voice had echoed from the pulpit, dripping with a holy kind of pity. The mark was a deep, angry red. It started at her left temple, swept down her cheek, and vanished near the corner of her mouth, the color of a blood rose, or a fresh wound. To the town kids, it was a target for their pebbles and their taunts. To the women, it was a sign of bad blood, a physical stain left by the sins of her long-dead parents. To the men, she was just damaged goods, not worth a first glance, let alone a second. Her life was a miserable rotation of chores at her uncle's house. Bartholomew Finch was the town blacksmith, a grim-faced man who'd taken her in not from love, but from a grudging duty he wore like a shirt made of thorns. He never mentioned the mark. He didn't have to. His silence was a constant shout of her worthlessness. He treated her like his anvil, a tool to be used without a soul, without a feeling. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended. She was as quiet and as noticed as a mouse scratching in the walls. But this afternoon, the air was thick with more than just heat. A tension coiled through the dusty street. Roscoe Pike, the town's barrel-chested deputy, was holding court outside the saloon. His cruelty was legendary, matched only by his ambition. He was everything Isabel was afraid of. He was loud. He was arrogant. And sometimes his predatory eyes would land on her, not with desire, but with a cold curiosity, like he was wondering what use a broken thing like her could possibly have. "Another raid," Pike boomed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice that sizzled in the dust. "Apaches. Took 3 head of cattle from the Miller place. It's that ghost, I tell you, the one they call Talon." A nervous murmur rippled through the small crowd. The name was a curse, a boogeyman's tale spoken in whispers around campfires. Talon, the Apache who walked alone. A phantom they blamed for every stolen horse, every missing traveler, every shadow that moved too fast in the twilight. Isabel hurried past, clutching a small basket of mending. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to feel Pike's eyes on her. She just wanted to disappear back into the dusty silence of her uncle's house. But as she passed, Pike's voice cut through the air, sharp and mean. "Well, look what we have here. The town's own little shadow." He took a step forward, blocking her path. The other men chuckled. Isabel froze, her eyes still on the ground. She could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "Still hiding that pretty face, Isabel?" he sneered. "Don't you worry. A man could get used to a thing like that. Might even keep a wife humble." His words were a slap. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. A shame that had nothing to do with her mark and everything to do with the man standing in front of her. She mumbled an apology, sidestepped him, and practically ran the rest of the way to the blacksmith's shop, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know it yet, but Roscoe Pike's casual cruelty wasn't casual at all. He had a plan for her, and that night her world was going to end. She served her uncle his supper in silence, stew and hard bread, the same meal as every night. She ate her own portion standing by the stove as usual. The little house was thick with the smell of coal dust and resentment. Bartholomew Finch finally pushed his empty bowl away and cleared his throat. "Pike's looking to settle down," he said, not looking at her. His voice was flat, like he was discussing the price of iron. "He needs a wife, someone quiet, someone who won't give him any trouble." The wooden spoon fell from Isabel's hand. It clattered on the stone floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The implication hit her like a fist, knocking the air from her lungs. Roscoe Pike. The thought was a violation. His meaty hands, his foul breath, the mean little glint in his eyes. He, he wants me?" she whispered. The words tasted like ash. "He's willing to overlook your affliction," Bartholomew said, as if Pike were some kind of saint. "He sees it as a way to keep a wife in her place. Humble." He took a long drink of ale, then wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "There's a $50 settlement in it. Enough for a new bellows for the forge, enough to clear my debts." $50, a new bellows. He had sold her. The years of thankless work, the silent endurance, the tiny secret hope she held that one day she might just walk away from it all. It all collapsed. It crumbled into this one single, horrifying moment. She wasn't his niece. She wasn't even a person. She was livestock, a piece of property bartered for a piece of equipment. Tears welled, hot and bitter, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. She would not give him the satisfaction. A spark of defiance buried for years under a mountain of humiliation flickered to life. "No," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it seemed to fill the entire room. Bartholomew slammed his mug down on the table. The ale sloshed over the rim. "No, you don't have a say. You're my blood, my burden. I've fed and clothed you for 10 years. You'll do as you're told." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "The wedding is in 2 days." He left the room without another word. The finality of it was like a door slamming shut on her life. Isabel stood frozen, the world tilting beneath her feet. 2 days, 48 hours until she was handed over to a monster. Her life was already a prison, but this would be a cage within the cage. There would be no escape. The despair was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing down, trying to crush her. She stumbled to the back door, her lungs screaming for air, and burst out into the cooling night. The moon was a cold silver coin in a sky littered with stars. The sounds of the town, a distant piano, the bark of a dog seemed to come from another world. Her world had just ended. She sank to the ground by the woodpile, her body shaking with a rage so fierce it scared her. She would rather die in the desert. She would rather be torn apart by coyotes than be Roscoe Pike's property. And that's when she felt it. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in the air, a shift in the weight of the night, the feeling of being watched by something other than the cold, indifferent stars. Her head snapped up. Her eyes scanned the deep shadows where the edge of the town bled into the scrubland. A figure detached itself from the darkness. He moved with a liquid silence that made the hair on her arms stand up. He was tall and lean, dressed in buckskin trousers and a plain shirt. His long black hair was unbound. He was Apache, but he carried himself with a stillness that was both terrifying and absolute. His face was all sharp angles, a landscape of shadows in the moonlight. His expression was impossible to read. Isabel scrambled backward, a scream catching in her throat. It had to be him, Talon, the ghost the whole town feared. He hadn't come for cattle. He hadn't come for revenge. He had come for her. He stopped a dozen paces away. He made no move, no threat. He just watched her, his dark eyes seeming to drink the moonlight. He wasn't looking at her mark. He was looking at her. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. And in his gaze, there was no judgment, no pity, no disgust. There was only a quiet, unnerving observation. "They talk in the town," he said. His voice was low and rough, as if he didn't use it often. It wasn't the voice of a monster from a ghost story. "They will give you to the man with the silver star, the cruel one." Isabel could only stare, her fear warring with a sudden, shocking disbelief. He knew. He took another slow step forward. "Your uncle trades you for a tool. That man will use you like one." He paused. His gaze swept over the small, suffocating house behind her, then returned to her face. "They give you a cage. I offer you the horizon." The offer was so impossible, so utterly insane, that it broke through her fear. The horizon? What did that even mean? "Who? Who are you?" she stammered. "A man with no people," he answered simply. He took one more step. "You are a woman with no people. We are the same." He wasn't the same. He was a feared warrior, a phantom of the night. She was a disfigured girl, an outcast. But standing there under the cold silver moon, his words struck a chord of truth so deep it vibrated in her bones. In the eyes of Redemption Creek, they were both nothing. They were both ghosts. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a statement of fact. A door opening in the wall of her prison, or stay for the cage. He gestured with his chin toward the vast, dark wilderness that stretched out behind him. It was a place of rattlesnakes and scorpions, of thirst and starvation. It was a place of certain death. But her uncle's house, and the future it held with Roscoe Pike, was also a place of death. Just a slower, more agonizing kind. A death of the soul. Isabel looked at the back door of the house, the cage. Then she looked at the silent Apache warrior and the infinite, terrifying freedom he represented. It wasn't a choice between life and death. It was a choice between two different ways to die. One was guaranteed, a slow strangulation of her spirit. The other was a gamble, a desperate, terrifying leap into the unknown. The spark of defiance that had flickered to life in the kitchen now roared into a bonfire. She would not be sold. She would not be broken. She would rather be a ghost in the desert than a slave in that town. Slowly, her body still trembling, Isabel Finch, the girl no one wanted, got to her feet. She took a deep breath of the dry night air. It felt like the first clean breath of a new life. Without a single word, she walked past the woodpile, away from the cage and toward the solitary Apache who had offered her the horizon. And just like that, the world she knew, a world of straight lines, wooden walls, and predictable cruelty, vanished behind her. The wilderness swallowed them whole. Talon moved through the desert like a ghost. He was part of the landscape, an extension of the rock and the shadow. For Isabel, every single step was a battle between faith and terror. Sharp stones and thorny brush tore at her thin shoes, shredding them within the first day. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the rasp of her own breathing and the lonely cry of a distant coyote. For 2 days they didn't speak. Talon's language was the language of the wild. A raised hand meant stop. A pointed finger meant treacherous ground. A slight nod toward a cluster of ferns in the shadow of a rock meant water, a hidden spring she never would have seen. He read the land like an open book. To Isabel, it was a terrifying, unreadable scrawl. Her fear was a constant companion. Every rustle in the brush was a rattlesnake. Every shadow was a mountain lion. She was a creature of walls and fences, and this vast, untamed emptiness felt like it was actively trying to kill her. Thirst was a fire in her throat. Hunger was a clawing beast in her stomach. The miserable life she'd fled now seemed almost luxurious. At least there had been a roof. At least there had been a well. On the third day she broke. They were resting in the thin shade of a juniper tree, the midday sun a merciless eye in the sky. Her feet were a mess of blisters and blood. Her body ached with a fatigue so deep it felt like a disease. Her hope had shriveled to a dry, brittle thing. Tears of frustration and pure despair finally broke free, cutting clean paths through the grime on her face. "I can't," she sobbed, the words torn from her. "I can't go on. You should have just left me there. This isn't different. It's just a bigger cage. Talon, who had been watching the horizon, turned his steady gaze on her. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer comforting words. He simply walked over, unslung a small pouch from his hip, and took out a piece of dried meat and a small, shriveled root. He placed them in her hand. "Eat," he said. Then he did something that stunned her. He knelt, untied the worn leather of his own moccasins, and held them out to her. "Your shoes are for walking on wood. These are for walking on the earth." Isabel stared at him, then at the moccasins. They were worn smooth, shaped by countless miles of silent travel. It was an act of such profound, practical kindness that it sliced right through her self-pity. Her hands trembled as she took them. The soft, supple deerskin was a balm to her savage feet. As she ate the tough, smoky meat and chewed on the bitter root, he finally spoke again. His voice was as quiet as the landscape around them. "The cage you left had bars made of whispers and stares," he said, his eyes on the distant, shimmering mountains. "This cage has bars made of thirst and hunger. You can break these bars. The others, you could not." His words settled in her heart. Simple and true. He was right. Here, her fight was against the elements, not against the poison of people. It was a pure fight, an honest one. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was respect. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a master of this brutal world. That night, he built a small, smokeless fire in a hollow. He showed her how to use a flint and steel, his large, calloused hands guiding hers with a surprising patience. As they sat in the small circle of light, the vast darkness pressing in around them, a new kind of silence fell. It wasn't empty. It was companionable. She found the courage to really look at him, not as the phantom from the town's ghost stories, but as the man who had given her a choice. His face, which had seemed so severe, now showed lines of weariness around his eyes. He wasn't a spirit. He was a man, a profoundly lonely man. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why did you help me?" He stared into the flames for a long time. When he answered, his voice was low. "I watched the town. I watched them throw stones at you when you were a girl. I watched them turn their faces away. I saw how they made you small." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes holding a deep, ancient pain. "I know what it is to be cast out." That simple confession was more intimate than any touch. It was a bridge built between their two solitudes. The next day, something shifted. She wasn't just a burden he was dragging through the desert. She began to learn. She watched how he walked, placing his feet without a sound. She learned to identify the plants he gathered, yarrow for wounds, yucca for its sweet fruit. He taught her how to find north by the sun, how to read the tracks of deer in the dust. Her body hardened. The blisters became calluses. The sun turned her skin a deep brown. The constant struggle replaced her frailty with a wiry strength she never knew she possessed. One afternoon, they were moving through a narrow canyon. The sharp, dry rattle of a snake echoed from the rocks just ahead. Isabel froze, her blood turning to ice. A large diamondback was coiled on a sun-warmed ledge, its head raised, its forked tongue tasting the air. Before she could scream, Talon moved. He was a blur, a flash of motion. His long knife gleamed in the sun. In an instant, the snake's head was gone, its body still writhing in the dust. He kicked the head away and calmly picked up the body. "Good meat," he said, as if he'd just picked a berry. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "You didn't scream. You are learning to be quiet." She realized he was right. Her first instinct hadn't been to panic. It had been to freeze, to be silent. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. That evening, they cooked the snake over the fire. Its white, tender meat was the most satisfying meal she had ever eaten. She had faced death, and now she was consuming it to survive. A week into their journey, they crested a high ridge and looked down into a hidden valley. A small, clear stream snaked through a grove of cottonwood trees. The land was green, more alive than anything she had seen since leaving Redemption Creek. It was a sanctuary. As they walked down into the valley, Isabel felt the warm sun on her face. She absent-mindedly touched her cheek, her fingers tracing the familiar, hated landscape of her birthmark. Talon noticed the gesture. "The people in the town," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They called it a devil's mark." Isabel flinched. She nodded without looking at him. "They are blind," he said simply. He stopped walking and pointed to the western sky, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in brilliant strokes of crimson and rose. "It is the color of the sky before the stars come out," he said, his voice soft. "It is a sunset mark." Isabel stared at him, stunned. No one had ever described her mark as anything but a curse, a flaw, a stain. To hear it compared to something beautiful, something natural, it was a gift so profound it stole her breath. Sunset mark. In his eyes, she wasn't disfigured. She was just a part of the wild, beautiful world he called home. Standing there in that hidden valley, Isabel Finch felt the last pieces of the broken girl from Redemption Creek fall away like dust. She was no longer a pariah. She was a survivor. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't entirely alone. Their alliance, born from pure desperation, was slowly, quietly, becoming something more. The hidden valley, which Talon called Willow Creek Basin, became their entire world. It was a paradise carved out of a harsh land. The stream gave them fresh water and small, silvery fish. The hills were full of deer and rabbits. For the first time in her memory, Isabel knew what it felt like to have a full belly and a peaceful mind. Their life fell into a simple rhythm, dictated by the sun. Talon taught her everything she needed to know, not just to survive, but to thrive. He showed her how to make snares from sinew, how to skin a rabbit with a sharp piece of flint, how to tan the hide until it was soft. He was a demanding teacher, but when he gave praise, it was like finding a diamond in the dirt. A simple good, after she managed to bring down a grouse with a well-aimed rock, made her feel like a queen. She, in turn, brought a different kind of order to their camp. She had a knack for turning their rough shelter, a rock overhang Talon had walled off with woven branches, into something that felt like a home. She found flat stones for a hearth, wove sleeping mats from river reeds, and discovered a patch of wild berries that she mashed and dried into sweet cakes, a trick her mother had taught her long ago. But it was the quiet moments that truly forged their bond. The silence between them as they sat by the fire was no longer empty. It was a shared space, comfortable and deep. One night, as she was mending a tear in his shirt with a bone needle, she found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "You said you were a man with no people," she began, her eyes on her work. "Why did you leave them?" Talon was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. He stared into the fire, his face a mask of old sorrows. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "I did not leave," he said. "I was cast out." He told her about his tribe, the Mescalero. He spoke of a great war chief, Victorio, a man of fierce charisma and even fiercer rage. Talon had been one of his best warriors, respected for his courage and skill. "Victorio saw only blood," Talon explained, his gaze lost in the flames. "He believed the answer to our pain was to cause more pain. We raided a homestead. The men were gone. Only women and children." He paused, the crackle of the fire filling the sudden, heavy silence. "A warrior fights warriors," he continued, his voice tight. "He does not raise his hand against a mother holding her child. I refused the order. I stood between my brothers and the cabin door." He had defied his war chief in front of the entire war party, an unforgivable sin. For choosing mercy over vengeance, he was declared an outcast, a walker alone, banished, told to never again speak the name of his people or show his face in their lands. To them, he was dead. "I have been walking alone for 5 winters," he finished. His voice held no self-pity. It was just a fact, a part of his story. Isabel looked at him, and the feared phantom of Redemption Creek dissolved completely. She saw a man of principle, a man who had sacrificed everything he had ever known because it was the right thing to do. Her respect for him deepened into something like awe. He had chosen honor over belonging. "You did the right thing," she whispered, her voice fierce. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. It was clear no one had ever said that to him before. A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only reply. But it was enough. But while they were building a new life, the whispers of their old one were stirring. Back in Redemption Creek, Isabel Finch's disappearance had become a scandal. At first, they thought she'd just run off, a foolish girl who was probably already dead in the desert. But Roscoe Pike was not a man who liked being made a fool of. The idea that his property, the humble marked-up girl he'd agreed to take, had chosen the wilderness over him was a stinging insult. It was a public humiliation. He found the tracks near the Finch property, a man's moccasins alongside Isabel's smaller shod footprints. He knew instantly, the Apache ghost. "He's taken her!" Pike roared in the saloon, playing the part of the righteous protector. "That savage has stolen a white woman. We can't let that stand." He conveniently forgot to mention that her own uncle had sold her for $50. Instead, he painted a vile picture of a helpless Christian girl abducted by a bloodthirsty heathen. He stoked the town's fear and prejudice into a raging fire. He offered a bounty, $100 of his own money, for Talon's scalp in the safe return of Isabel. He quickly deputized a posse of 5 men. There was young Deputy Miller, barely 20 and desperate to prove himself. The two Cogan brothers, known more for their drunken brawling than any real skill, a grizzled old prospector named Peterson, who claimed to know the territories, and Bartholomew Finch himself. Pike had shamed him into joining, publicly accusing him of failing to protect his own blood. Bartholomew's guilt curdled into a burning need for revenge. Revenge against the Apache who had cost him his money, his new bellows, and his reputation. Their tracking was clumsy. They were town men. But Peterson, for all his bluster, had some skill. He found the trail, and though Talon had covered their tracks well, the posse, fueled by whiskey and righteous fury, began their slow, relentless pursuit. They were a serpent slithering out of the corrupt heart of Redemption Creek, and its head was filled with Roscoe Pike's venomous pride. They had no interest in a rescue. Their quest was about extermination and ego, and they were slowly, surely closing the distance to the tranquil sanctuary of Willow Creek Basin. They were bringing the hatred of the world with them, a world that Talon and Isabel had so desperately tried to escape. The seasons turned in Willow Creek Basin. Summer's harsh gold softened into the amber of autumn. Winter came with a quiet blanket of snow, followed by the vibrant green of spring. The valley changed, and so did Isabel. The frail, terrified girl was gone forever. In her place was a woman forged in the wild. Her hands were calloused and capable. She could start a fire with a single spark, track a deer, and read the coming weather in the clouds. The sunset mark on her cheek was still there, but it no longer felt like a brand of shame. In this world, her value was measured by what she could do, not by how she looked. Talon had changed too. The deep solitude that had clung to him like a shroud was beginning to fade. He had grown used to her presence, to the sound of her voice, to the way she hummed old tunes while she worked. He started to speak more, sharing stories of his boyhood, of the legends his grandfather had told him. The words were still few, but now they had a warmth they'd never had before. Their partnership had deepened into a powerful, unspoken love. It was there in the way he would bring her a wildflower he'd found on a hunt. It was there in the way she always saved the best piece of meat for him. They were two halves of a whole, perfectly in tune with the rhythms of their life and with each other. One night in late spring, with the scent of sage on the wind and the stars blazing in the desert sky, he looked at her across the fire. His eyes held a raw, tender vulnerability she had never seen before. He reached out and gently traced the edge of her birthmark with his thumb. His touch sent a shiver through her, a tremor of healing. In that simple gesture was an acceptance so complete it mended wounds she hadn't even known she carried. She leaned into his hand and he drew her close. Their union under the stars wasn't a moment of fleeting passion. It was a profound connection, the final sealing of the bond between two souls who had found their home in each other. Life in the valley was now filled with a new joy, a new purpose. They worked together, reinforcing their shelter, building a small stone corral for 2 wild goats Talon had managed to tame. Then a few months later, a quiet certainty settled deep within Isabel. The rhythm of her own body had changed. She was pregnant. She was terrified. and she was overcome with joy. To bring a new life into this wild, dangerous world was a staggering thought. But the idea of a child, Talon's child, their child, filled her with a fierce, protective love that burned away all fear. She waited until evening to tell him. They were sitting by the stream, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the canyon walls. "Talon," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Our family will be larger when the snows come again." He turned to her, his face unreadable. He looked at her stomach, then into her eyes. The stern mask of the warrior fell away, replaced by an expression of such profound wonder, it brought tears to her own eyes. He placed his large, warm hand gently on her belly. "A child," he whispered, the word full of awe. "Our child." From that moment on, a new energy drove him. He was no longer just a provider. He was building a future. He taught Isabel which plants were best for a nursing mother, and he found a hidden cave high in the cliffs and began stocking it with dried meat, water, and furs. "A safe place," he said, "if there is ever trouble." Isabel spent her days preparing, weaving a small sleeping basket from river reeds, sewing tiny clothes from the softest doeskin. As her body changed, she felt a sense of completeness she had never imagined possible. This child conceived in love, in their hidden sanctuary, was the ultimate act of defiance against the world that had cast them out. They were a family now. The lonely Apache warrior and the girl no one wanted had forged a new beginning. But they were blissfully unaware that the serpent from their past was still crawling through the wilderness, and it was getting closer every day. Its fangs were dripping with venom, and it was determined to destroy the paradise they had built. The first sign of trouble was a whisper on the wind, a single misplaced stone on a game trail that Talon knew was used only by deer, a distant flock of crows exploding into the sky for no reason. To anyone else, they were nothing. To Talon, they were a warning. A cold watchfulness settled over him. He spent more time on the high ridges overlooking the valley, a motionless sentinel against the sky. "Someone is coming," he said to Isabel one evening. His voice was grim. "They hunt us." The peace that had filled Isabel's heart was shattered. A cold dread seeped into its place. "Pike," she breathed. The name tasted like poison. "Yes," Talon confirmed. "A man like that does not forget an insult to his pride." Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She was heavy with child, slower, more vulnerable than ever. But then she looked at Talon's calm, determined face and felt the strength he had taught her rise up to meet her fear. She was not the helpless girl from Redemption Creek. This was her home. This was her family, and she would fight for it. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "We do not run," Talon said, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "This is our land. We will make them bleed for every step they take on it." His plan was not to fight them head-on. It was a strategy of 1,000 cuts, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain as his greatest weapon. For 2 days he worked without rest, turning their sanctuary into a death trap. He set deadfalls in the narrowest parts of the canyon. He rigged a rock slide on a steep cliff. He placed sharpened stakes in concealed pits along the only path into the valley. He was no longer the gentle partner. He was the ghost from the settlers' stories, a deadly predator on his own hunting ground. Isabel, despite her condition, worked beside him. She gathered armfuls of thorny cactus and blocked alternative routes. She sharpened dozens of arrows, her hands moving with practiced skill. She was the keeper of their home, and her protective instinct was a raging fire. On the morning of the third day, Talon returned from the ridge. "They are here," he said simply. 6 of them. The posse entered the valley with a swaggering confidence. Roscoe Pike was in the lead, his face flushed with the thrill of the hunt. He saw the green valley, the stream, the signs of a good camp, and a greedy smile spread across his face. "He got comfortable," Pike sneered to his men. "Got lazy with his stolen prize. Let's go smoke him out." The first to fall was one of the Kogan brothers. He saw what he thought was a clear path and stepped right into a pit Talon had hidden under a thin layer of branches. His scream was cut short as he was impaled on the fire-hardened stakes below. The sudden, brutal death sent a shockwave of fear through the posse. Their confident advance slowed to a nervous crawl. Next, Talon used the terrain itself. As they navigated a narrow ledge, a single arrow, fired from an unseen perch high above, struck the rock face near a carefully balanced pile of loose rock. The vibration was all it took. A torrent of gravel and stone cascaded down, sweeping the second Kogan brother off the ledge to his death. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a hunt. It was an execution. They were being picked apart by an enemy they couldn't even see. The old prospector, Peterson, lost his nerve. "This is his ground, Pike," he yelled. "He's a devil. We should turn back." "Coward!" Pike roared, his face purple with rage. "There's only one of him. Keep moving." He shoved Deputy Miller forward. "You and Finch, check that thicket. Flush him out." Bartholomew Finch, his face pale with terror, and the young deputy moved cautiously toward a dense patch of mesquite. As they pushed through the branches, an arrow hissed out of the shadows and buried itself in Bartholomew's shoulder. He cried out and fell, clutching the wound. Miller fired his pistol wildly into the trees. From his hiding place, Talon watched, his expression grim. He had aimed to wound, not kill the blacksmith. His real fight was with Pike. Now only 4 men were left. Pike, the wounded Bartholomew, a terrified Miller, and the prospector. Pike, blinded by fury, finally spotted Talon moving between the rocks and charged, firing his revolver. Bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls as Talon melted back into the shadows. Pike's reckless charge led him right into Talon's final trap. He followed Talon into a narrow ravine, the one place Talon had told Isabel to stay away from. This was where her part of the plan began. Hidden on the cliff above, she had her own pile of rocks ready. At Talon's sharp, hawk-like cry, she heaved a large boulder over the edge. It didn't hit Pike, but it landed behind him, blocking his only escape. He was trapped. Talon stepped out from behind a rock, his knife in his hand. Pike stood panting, his revolver empty. The hunter and the hunted, the brute and the warrior. "Savage!" Pike snarled, drawing a large Bowie knife. "I'll take that scalp myself, and I'll drag that marked-up witch back where she belongs." The insult to Isabel ignited a cold fire in Talon's eyes. He didn't speak. He moved. The fight was brutal and short. Pike was strong, a brawler used to overpowering men in saloon fights. But Talon was a dancer of death. His movements were precise, economical. He dodged Pike's clumsy lunges, his own knife a silver blur, a feint, a sidestep, and a final swift thrust. Roscoe Pike sank to his knees, a look of shocked disbelief on his face before collapsing into the dust. The silence that followed was absolute. From the rocks, Deputy Miller and Peterson stared, horrified. They had seen their leader, the embodiment of their town's authority, cut down with terrifying ease. Bartholomew Finch was groaning on the ground, the fight long gone from him. Talon emerged from the ravine, his face like carved stone. He looked at the remaining men. He raised his bow, an arrow knocked. Peterson threw down his rifle, his hands in the air. Miller, shaking, did the same. Talon walked toward them. He stopped in front of Bartholomew, who flinched away. Talon simply looked at the arrow in the man's shoulder, then at his face, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. He turned to Miller. "Take him," Talon said, his voice a low growl. "Take them both. Leave this valley and never return. Tell the town that the girl they cast out is gone. This is her land now, and it is guarded." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and melted back into the rocks. Isabel rushed to him, her heart pounding. She checked him for wounds, her hands trembling. He was untouched. They held each other, the adrenaline of the battle giving way to the profound relief of survival. They had faced the serpent, and they had won. Their home was safe once more, or so they thought. The silence that fell on Willow Creek Basin after the battle was heavier than any that had come before. The smell of blood and gunpowder hung in the air, a foul stain on their sanctuary. The bodies of Pike and the Kogan brothers were grim reminders of the violence that had invaded their home. There was no triumph in their victory, only a deep, sorrowful exhaustion. That night they sat by the fire, but the warmth did little to chase away the chill that had settled in their bones. The peace of their valley had been shattered. Its innocence was lost forever. "They will come back," Isabel said, her voice a whisper. Miller will tell them what happened. They'll send more men. Maybe the army. Talon stared into the flames, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond the battle. The young one, Miller. I saw his eyes. He was afraid, but he was not full of hate like Pike. He saw the truth. Talon paused, shaking his head. But the truth may not be enough. The town needs a monster. They will twist his story to fit the one they want to believe. He was right. Their freedom had been bought at a terrible price. The price of being known. They were no longer a myth. They were a location on a map. A target. The serpent was dead, but it had laid eggs of vengeance that would surely hatch. The cave, and Isabel said, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The safe place you prepared. Talon nodded grimly. We cannot stay here. Not now. We will rest, gather what we can, and then we must leave. We must go deeper into the mountains, to a place where no one will ever think to look. The decision was agony. This valley was the birthplace of their love, the only true home either of them had ever known. To leave felt like a kind of death, an admission that the world's hatred was a force you could never defeat, only outrun. As they prepared to leave, a new dynamic emerged. Talon had been wounded in the fight with Pike, a deep gash on his forearm that he had ignored. Now it was inflamed and painful. Isabel, once the student, became the caregiver. She cleaned the wound with a poultice of yarrow and willow bark, her touch firm and gentle. She took charge of their preparations, her movements efficient and purposeful. She was no longer his dependent. She was his equal, his partner, cemented by the fire battle. Meanwhile, a dazed and bleeding trio stumbled back into Redemption Creek. Deputy Miller's story was a terrified, confused jumble. He spoke of an ambush, of a valley that was a death trap, of an Apache who moved like a ghost. But he also spoke of things the town didn't want to hear. He spoke of Pike's reckless charge, of how they had been the invaders. And most disturbingly, he spoke of Isabel. She wasn't a prisoner, Miller stammered to the shocked crowd in the saloon. She fought with him. She was defending her home. His words were met with scorn and disbelief. The story was already written in their minds. A helpless white woman, brainwashed by a savage. The idea that she had chosen that life, that she had fought to protect it, was unthinkable. It challenged the very foundation of their world. The old prospector, Peterson, gave them a simpler story, one they could understand. He's a demon, he rasped, his eyes wide with fear. He killed them all without us barely laying an eye on him. The girl's bewitched. The whole valley is cursed. This was the story that took root, the story of a demon in the hills and his bewitched bride. Redemption Creek didn't send another posse. Fear had replaced their anger. They sealed off the memory of Willow Creek Basin, branding it a place of death and evil, a part of the map to be avoided at all costs. Deputy Miller, ostracized for his uncomfortable version of the truth, quietly packed his bags and left town a month later, unable to live with the ghosts of what he had seen. The town, in twisting the story to fit its own prejudices, had inadvertently given Talon and Isabel exactly what they needed. The fear they had inspired had become their shield. Unaware of this, Talon and Isabel made their final preparations. They packed dried meat, tools, and the small baby basket Isabel had woven. They took one last look at the shelter that had been their home, at the stream that had given them water, at the valley that had given them a life. He gave me the horizon, Isabel whispered, thinking back to that first night. I didn't know it would keep moving. Talon took her hand, his grip firm. The horizon is not a place, he said, his eyes meeting hers. It is a promise, the promise of a new sun. We will find another valley. We will build another home. As long as we are together, we carry our home with us. With that, they turned their backs on Willow Creek Basin. They walked away from the graves and the ghosts, climbing higher and higher into the remote, unforgiving peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. Their future was uncertain, their freedom fragile, but their bond was unbreakable. They were heading not toward a place on a map, but toward the promise of a life lived on their own terms, forever beyond the reach of the world that had tried to destroy them. 7 years passed. The world below churned on, but high in the mountains, in a hidden meadow accessible only by a secret trail, Talon and Isabel found their true sanctuary. They built a cabin of pine and stone, and a life the world could not touch. Here they raised their two children, Samuel with his father's quiet eyes and steady hands, and Rose with her mother's defiant spirit and a smile that could melt the winter snow. They grew up learning two worlds, reading tracts from their father and letters from their mother, the first of a new line born from a love that defied all hatred. Isabel was transformed. The timid girl was gone, replaced by a strong, confident woman. The sunset mark on her cheek was no longer a brand of shame, but simply a feature of the matriarch who was the heart of their family. And Talon, the walker alone, had finally found his people. The profound silence of his soul was filled by the warmth of his wife and the laughter of his children. One evening, as the sun set over their high mountain home, Isabel watched Talon patiently teaching Samuel how to carve a small wooden bird, while she braided wildflowers into Rose's hair. This was it, the culmination of their impossible journey. The girl no one wanted was now cherished, the center of her own universe. The lonely warrior had found his tribe. Talon had offered her the horizon, and they had discovered it wasn't some distant place on a map. It was the profound, quiet peace of a family, whole and free, under the vast western sky. The story of Talon and Isabel is a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the judgment of others. It's a testament to the fact that love can blossom in the most desolate of landscapes, and that a family is built not by blood or by society's rules, but by unbreakable bonds of loyalty and respect. They were two outcasts who found in each other the courage to defy a world that had rejected them, forging a legacy of freedom and love high in the remote wilderness. Their story is etched into the very soul of the Old West, a quiet epic of survival, defiance, and the creation of a home. If their incredible journey from outcasts to pioneers moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who appreciates tales of resilience and the untamed human spirit. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forgotten legends of the American frontier. Thank you for listening.